Welcome to this exciting encounter with Raluca Durbacă, the director of The Certainty of Probabilities, one of the up-and-coming voices of Romanian cinema. Thank you, Raluca, for taking the time to be with us today, even if it's almost bedtime in Romania.
Oh, thank you for inviting me. It's not nearly bedtime, but it's pretty late, yes.
I just want to remind everybody that this event is part of the Romanian Film Festival Q&A series organized with the occasion of the Romanian Film Festival Seattle this year in its 9th edition, and the Romanian Film Festival Arizona in its 2nd edition. And just another reminder, both festivals are hybrid and ongoing. At Northwest Film Forum, the Romanian Film Festival Seattle will screen Blue Moon by Alina Grigore this evening. Tomorrow they'll show Metronom by Alexandru Belc, and on Sunday, A Higher Law by Octav Chelaru. The Romanian Film Festival Arizona will present tomorrow Metronom by Alexandru Belc, and on Sunday, The Island by Anca Damian and Things Worth Weeping For by Cristina Groșan. All these movies are hosted by the majestic Theater Phoenix at their Tempe location. At the same time, we have an equally strong online program that runs through November 27. Raluca Durbaka's documentary, The Certainty of Probabilities, is one of the documentaries we are proud to present this year. I'm sure that many of these aspects will come up in the conversation, but just to briefly introduce the film is comprised entirely of archival footage produced during 1968, considered one of the most optimistic and prosperous years in the history of socialist Romania by the most important state-run documentary film studio, and offers a provoking critique of film and language as instruments of ideological domination. Our conversation today with Raluca Durbacă will be moderated by Mariangela Mihai, a sociocultural and visual anthropologist and ethnographic filmmaker who is currently a postdoctoral fellow in the Cultural and Politics program at Georgetown University. Thank you, Mariangela, for being with us today and for agreeing to lead this conversation. And this is how we're envisioning a 30 to 40 minutes conversation that you lead with Raluca, and then we can open it up to the public, and we invite actually the public to use their mic after this 30-40 minute period, or contribute in the chat with comments and share their thoughts and so on and so forth. So thank you so much, and I'll give you I was about to say the floor, but I'm only going to give you the mic.
Thank you so much, Marie-Louise, and hello everyone. I'm really excited to be here, and Raluca, hi, it's the first time we meet, but I'm really pleased to finally meet you. I asked you earlier, before we went live, how old are you, right? And you told me your age. That was important to me because I wanted to see what kind of your connection you had to the material, right? Were you born after the Romanian Revolution? Did you have any direct experiences in that, dystopian time? And how might that background have influenced your, editing choices and so on and so forth? So now they gave me the answer. I know you caught a part of the regime, although we were both kind of young at the time. So if you don't mind, I want to start with just a simple question. How did the idea of this film come about, right? So what was that first spark of, like, what? The archive, basically, or maybe it was something else. So yeah, please tell us.
Well, I was actually looking for an idea for an archival footage film, and it was my producer's suggestion, Velvet Moraru. She was my producer for this film, and she knew I wanted to start making film and be a director, and she suggested to try and do an archival film because she knew a bit about my passions and what I enjoy. I just kept going through some material that she had from a previous project, kept thinking of ideas, and I thought that what would help me narrow things down would be if I would just pick 1 year and look through all the materials that the documentary film studio produced for that specific year, and maybe I can find contradictions and patterns of representation of language in that and play with that. So it wasn't my initial thought wasn't to, oh, I'm going to make this great film. It's more, I want to see what I can do with limited material, limited in time, and coming from one film studio. When I started writing it, I wrote the project for the Romanian CNC. I wrote kind of like a classical narrative script, let's say, following events in chronological order. So starting from 1st of January until 30th of December, of course, I read many books, many documents. I talked to historians. Mihai Burcea, who's a Romanian historian, he was very helpful. He gave me a lot of material. He talked to me. I managed to go through a lot of things, but I think for me, the turning point was when I went and I actually saw the footage, because I did all this work without actually knowing what I would find in the archive. When I went there and I saw the whole material, and they were edited films, all of them, there wasn't any loose material, just some footage, which I also included in the film, but most of it were shorts of 10, 20 minutes. Most of them were newsreels, 10 minutes newsreels, one for each week of the year. So films about the forests, films about the constructions of the iron gates on the Danube, films about external visits of Nicolae Ceausescu to European countries. So it was incredibly diverse. So I decided I will make digital copies of everything, and I will sit down with Letizia, who was the editor, and we will watch this material. And we started watching it, of course. We started picking, selecting some fragments, and we made some group, some fragments that had to do with the industry, with agriculture, cultural life, political life, youth, you name it. What we thought were commercials, what we thought were funny things or unusual material. So we made this whole arrangement. It was like probably, I don't know, I think it was 6 hours long, the fragments selected. In total, there were about 300 films, short films that we picked from. We narrowed it down to 6 hours. And then we had the very tense and long discussions about how to organize the material, because I did not want to organize it chronologically. I thought it would be so redundant, and you cannot actually understand the material unless you you put it together in a specific way. So that's how I actually ended up choosing this structure, which is you have 6 locations: urban setting, rural setting, the industrial working grounds, the stadiums and places where the party activists held power, would manifest, the workers, the youth volunteer work sites, I think. Yes, that's what they were called. And also some where the artistic medium would manifest itself. So for every space, you had a social class that was inhabiting that space. And then I tried to look at how that social class was represented in that space, who was, which social class was more important than the other, which was described in a favorable light in opposition to the other. And I tried to look for these patterns and to see where the material actually contradicts itself, to see the gaps in it, what it doesn't say, to see what's absent. And for me, after watching that material for hundreds of times, it took me a while until I understood that you don't really see workers' bodies. You don't, because I tried to edit them in the 1st of May parade. And I only found seconds, 5 seconds, 10 seconds cut shots of workers actually working. So I had to dig through that material to find specific shots. And then you had an abundance of factories and everything that the regime really loved to brag about, you know? So this is how I actually went about to develop and structure the film. But my emotional connection with it, because you started with the question, was yes, I'm born in 1983, so I do remember the cold. I remember, I don't think I remember the lack of food because I was a child and my parents took care that I ate all the time. I remember no electricity. But it was my childhood, so I don't really, I mean, I was more scared when the revolution happened with tanks on the street. That was a traumatic event. My childhood in that period wasn't that hard. But what I equate that, the film is in 68, this 1968, it's the year that my father graduated from the naval, I don't know how you call it, institute, Marine Institute in
Academy, I think. Yeah.
Yes, so exactly. So he was 21, he graduated, that's the year he graduated. And it's the way he used to describe to me that his youth in that period, which it was specifically abundant and more optimistic than the 80s. For me, that's the connection, the emotional connection with the material. Because I would watch, I saw, for example, in one of the materials, I saw, it's called Bricu Mircea. I don't know how to say this in English. So it's a specific ship for students and the Naval Institute. And he used to tell me stories about having trainings on that ship. And then I saw it in on his graduation day, and he was probably on that ship, but I couldn't see him there. No, so it's that type of emotional connection that I have with the material. And of course, my father telling me about that time in his youth influenced me, but also reading studies on the economic situation in the country, which was much more stronger than it was in the 80s. So I kind of put those together and I decided this is what I want to believe about this material. Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much. That's really fascinating. So I was wondering, since you started with basically a pure interest in archival material, right? Not even the idea of what this film might look like. I'm wondering now, at what point you started being bugged by the idea of, well, this should have an audience, and what was that first intended audience, right? So I'm interested in the idea of the audience for the film. Who did you intend it for in the beginning? Has anything changed along the way, right? And have the life of the film so far, has it surprised you in terms of audience reception? Yeah.
Yes, well, that was probably the most difficult thing for me because I am left-leaning politically. My friends are left-leaning. I have read a lot of Marxist theory, film theory in film school. I'm influenced by that. So you probably know this, in Romania, the view of the 50 years of communism is very black and white, and it's one note. It doesn't have any nuance to it. It doesn't have, it's not, this decade was horrible, murderous. The 50s were murderous. The 60s were lighter. Living standard was higher. Social mobility was actually possible. Then 70s came with the economic crisis, which also hit Romania because it borrowed money from the IMF. And then 80s, complete madness, North Korea. So it's very varied. It's very wavy, the whole period. And what I wanted to show was that, you cannot look at the whole communist period as one single block, because if you keep reading it like that forever, you will not be able to understand anything, draw any meaningful, real conclusions from it, learn what to do or what not to do. So that was my impulse, was to show it to audiences who, to make it for audiences who are actually interested in letting go of the very hardcore mainstream narrative and looking more profoundly into this period. What I found was people who are very into hardcore mainstream communist is pure fucking, sorry, it's pure evil. Yes, there is nothing to see here. Do not look back. Do not look into the past. They looked at the film and they were ecstatic because they believe that the film proves their own personal core beliefs. On the other hand, when people, my friends who have the same political beliefs and they're in the same, have read the same books, they have the same influences intellectually, they saw what I was trying to do, you know, and they appreciated my initial motivation and what I was trying to make. So of course, it does bother me that it can be read in any way, but at the same time, I think it's kind of fascinating because what I kept telling myself while I was making the film is, you cannot change anyone's opinion with you cannot do it. I mean, they either are open to discussion, to critique of ideology, critique of current ideology through this, or not. I'm not going to teach anyone anything. I mean, the film can be enjoyed by everyone, of course. I'm glad that at least they get to see images that have not been seen in 50 years. So that's a plus. I think the material has some really gorgeous qualities. Some of the material is beautiful. I love it. I will probably be influenced for a long time in my filmmaking process by the way they structured it, by the way they work with it, the way they shot things, flowers and people on the field. I loved it so much. So I think that even though my initial goal wasn't achieved, I still think it's yeah, I'm okay with it. I'm happy. I'm satisfied. I think it's the best I could do with it. So yeah.
Well, one of the inner titles actually kind of, hints at this. It says that this is a film about interpretation and that it relies on the ability of the receiver to decode it in line with the intentions of the emitter. I think I almost cited it here. And so when I stopped there for a second and I was thinking that the film was actually much more difficult than I expected it to be in terms of the attention requires of you, right? And I'm gonna enjoy this archival movie, and it's gonna be, it was awesome, but I didn't expect it to ask so much work of me to pay attention, because some of the moves you make, at the meta level, at the editing level, at the sound level, are so subtle that if you blink, you might lose it, right? Yeah. There were times when actually I had to go back to listen again or to watch again to see exactly what what I might think that happened there. And so I was thinking about this interpretation, how might it be, somehow hindered by people without a context, all this context, right, of communism. That is not a homogeneous experience, and its history is complicated. And anyway, most people out there think that Eastern Europe is one thing, and it's hard to read us in some ways. So yeah, that's just a curiosity. I don't know, maybe our audience, that if there will be some questions, my hint at if they don't have this context, how they might see it. But I was thinking also, well, I'm going to go back a little bit, because you mentioned the 6 locations, right, in which you looked at different typologies of the then Romanians, the then subjects of the Communist Party in these specific places and class differences that were created with it. And I noticed that in the film, there's a notable absence, right? Which is the home place. Like what's happening in the houses of the people, right? We don't know. And so, and it's a loud absence, yeah? It's very loud. And so I was wondering, in this archival footage, you said you watched maybe 300 and something short movies and so on and so forth. Was there anything like that? Have they ever tried to enter the homes of people in a more personable or, you know, that kind of way?
No, there wasn't any footage like that. I think the only, when you actually enter an apartment, but it's a kind of a petit bourgeois apartment in the middle of Bucharest, where the engineer goes to, I don't know, be upset that his wife has not cooked dinner yet. But no, there's nothing about the intimate life of an everyday citizen, because you are either a worker or a peasant or a party activist or an intellectual, or you are part of a social system. There is no intimacy, because intimacy brings a lot of things that cannot be controlled, right? It's very I can't find the English word, but you get what I mean. I also think that the purpose of the materials were to represent public life, which was, although the party was controlling private life, but public life is where you can show how the party policies have impacted different social classes and how the party manifests itself in the public space, because the manifestation of the party in a private space would be threatening, it would be uncomfortable. So you do not want to show how you enter the private life of people. What they do show is how people spend their free time, so not just working, but also free time. They go to the mountains, to the seaside, they go hiking in the forest, they walk along the shores. So free time is also captured, because of course it's part of the 8-hour system, right? Sleep, work, free time. The communists were always militate, I don't know if this is the right word, but they were people actually protested and died in the 30s for this, right? For the right to free time. So it was part of the ideology, but no, private life is extremely absent, and you don't get the feeling, you know, that all that material, that there is a private life. It feels like this is a hive, and everyone is contributing to the hive, that the home is Romania. That's what they're building. They're also building the national identity. They're starting in 1968 to build national identity and the whole myth, and that becomes the home, right, for everyone, for all of us. But yeah, you're right about the private space.
Oh, you mentioned this scene with the engineer that comes home, and I guess the propaganda there was to critique his lifestyle, that he was sedentary and not active enough in his free time, which kind of made me think that here is the Communist Party trying to actually control even the leisure time of people to make it more productive in the way they want it to be, right? So
yes, you can. We were talking about interpret. You can interpret it like that, but also, why not like some miner works? Why doesn't the party come and say, listen, you work underground, it's not very healthy for you, or you should stop working when you come back? I mean, you should take your time and breathe the fresh air and take a walk in the park. No, it's the kind of middle class paper worker in the city who gets this advice, right? He's worthy of this advice, and he lives in a middle class apartment in the capital. So I think it's also telling that yes, I can see. Yes, I believe. I mean, regarding your question, if there was a middle class, I think what you see represented in this, it's there is a middle class, of course. And the middle class is the one that doesn't get to do the very hard jobs in the industry. They don't work in the factories. They work behind the scenes. They are engineers or people who would do the plan, you know, in the factory. They draw the plans, and then the working class is the people who actually work. So I think it's kind of how you choose to look at these type of materials, how you interpret them.
Thank you. Actually answered the second part of my question, because the image that follows is an image of miners working very hard. So you asked that question in the film.
Yes.
So I'm going to ask now a big question that I was like, okay, when is it coming? When is it coming? You made a very clear choice to not let the tyrant speak until 1 hour and 2 minutes or something like that. Like, when is he going to give a speech? When are we going to hear his voice, right? And until 1 hour in the film, he's but a specter, like this elusive figure that appears and cuts a ribbon or dances with some people in a circle, or just passes by. You don't even, if you don't know him, you won't know it's him. I thought that was an amazing choice. So I would love for us to hear more about it. Yeah.
Well, I think my idea when I started doing the film was that it's not going to be a film about him. It's going to be a film about a collective experience during that time. And if you put him in the foreground and you let him speak, then it's going to be a film about him. So I tried to keep him as I shut him up. I just cut the speeches. I did not let him speak until an hour later, when I thought, okay, so this is the segment that's dedicated for you, and you will speak now in this segment, and then you will keep quiet again. I thought it was necessary to kind of isolate him. Also, I think that his voice, his speech pattern is so recognizable. I think it just provokes instant reactions from spectators, instant reactions of rejection, which I might also myself, I would, from time to time, when I would hear one of his speeches in the material, I would like, oh no, I don't want to hear him. So I thought the best way to protect my idea was to keep him quiet and then let him speak in a very calculated spot in the film, and very strict, because I wanted the spectator to actually understand that, yes, he was the big bad dictator, the big bad tyrant, but he wasn't the only one who went through this. They also, it was in 1968, they changed from the idea of a collective leadership of the party to the idea of one man running the show. And the Russian invasion of Prague allowed him to build his personality cult, to start building it. But they were still holding on to this Leninist idea of collective leadership. And you can see in materials, when they go to cut a ribbon, they pronounce everyone's name. It's him and Mizil and Maurer and all the important leaders. After 1968, it's just him. Banners with his name start to appear. So there is a shift there. And I wanted to let people know that, yes, he is part of this history, but he's not, we don't have to look at him all the time. You know, we can, in order to look at the other stuff, we need to keep him quiet for a while. Yeah. And also, I mean, come on, he's everywhere. All of the films that about Romanian communist period, he's present. So if I could, I would have just cut him out completely, but it's not, it wasn't an option for me. He had to be there. Yeah.
Thank you. Marie-Louise, how much more time we have, just to choose my questions carefully now?
Well, we have 5 more minutes from those 40 minutes, but we can go a little over if we're getting carried away with the conversation, and I think we are.
Sure.
I talk a lot, and that's why.
But all of it was really, really important to contextualize the way you thought of the movie. So I think it's going great.
Yeah, thank you so much. So when I was watching, you have a background in political science, right? That's sort of.
I studied political science in the first university I attended. Yeah.
I was interested in this play with historicity that is happening in the film on all these layers. You know, I'm still thinking about it, actually. It made me think about Walter Benjamin's dialectical image, right? And this critique that history is not a linear and homogeneous process. It's actually a montage, basically, right? A montage of multiple voices that sometimes contradict each other, and there's history, right? Not even temporal in the same way we think about it. So it almost seemed like one of these exercises in this kind of speaking back to history in a new way through by reinterpreting and sometimes not interpreting at all, maybe the archival footage. So I was wondering, how did you think about history in this, right? Like, because you were about 6 years old then, but I assume you had one of those televisions that ran from 7 to 9 at night, and we were given this propaganda every day, and we were taught that history is that one thing. Then the revolution came, and we went back to school, and there were new history books where everything was changed, and so on and so forth. How was your relationship to the idea of history and what all this means in the making of the film, if you thought about it in any way? Yeah.
I didn't really think, I mean, I thought about it, but I was more focused on representation than history, because I felt that what was most important for me was the material I was working with, and from which I was making the film. So the archive itself was my subject. So I was always thinking about what is an archival image, what's from a semiotic point of view, what are the what can I read in it, the materiality of the material, the film stock, how it degrades. I was always trying to decide, how do I approach it? Do I play with it? Do I slow it down, stretch it, zoom into it? So do I play with the material, or do I use it and like blocks, like building blocks? And what does that give me? The question of history was more history of film for me than history. And it's because it's also influenced by my formation as a film critic and attending film studies, and I always read it in this context. I read a bit of Foucault when I was trying to do the film, to understand, not to go sideways. I tried to, my main goal, and I did this for 2 months, I tried to understand what is ideology, because I couldn't write what is ideology unless I understood it. So I read a lot of books about ideology, and that took me in a lot of directions, which also discussed history. I don't know, I read Gramsci, and I just went all over the place trying to dig in. But it's history of film. What is film? What is the material I'm working with? What is representation? How can I read this language, and how can I use this material? What is my engagement with the material? Do I respect it? Do I not respect it? So those were kind of the challenges that I was facing when I was making the film. I should have thought about history maybe more. Yeah, I'll do that for the next one.
Great. There's another level. Oh wow! And this is it's a tough one, right? Because there are short moments there from things that have to do with capitalism, anti-capitalist critiques, and so on and so forth. Like, I think there was a visit. Was it the president of Vietnam at the time? went you? I wasn't sure, but it seemed like maybe came to visit Romania. So, you know,
Are you talking about, sorry, the material in which Ion Iliescu is speaking?
I don't, perhaps, yeah. So there was a moment when there was about the brothership between Romania and Vietnam, right? That was the point, right? Vietnam, anti-American, right? Anti-capitalist. Therefore, we have something in common. And then later on, we have this footage from a banana company that was really famous, like one of the biggest for
Ecuador.
Right, Gross Michael Banana Company, and that history is very American actually, and it's about the precarious lives of workers in all Latin America that worked on these banana plantations, right? So it's like just such a juxtaposition of complete dissonant, you know, historical critiques, I guess, that contradict even they contradict the view, the vision of the Communist Party. That's what I mean, right? Yeah, welcoming these bananas that are made with the blood, basically, of, you know, of workers in Latin America.
I agree. And for me, for example, the first critique where I just went, no, was, I mean, the communist ideology is about equal rights for women and men. And then how do you represent women? Like objects that you hang clothes on, and there are sexual innuendos. And I hated the representation of women. And I thought for me was like the biggest and easiest contradiction you can see inside the material. But also what was actually very funny was while I was watching it, because I remember that de Gaulle comes and visits Romania in May 1968, and that's when the riots start in Paris. And I remember when I was watching the material, I was always thinking what was going on in the rest of the world, while here there was a peace, you know, universal social peace and prosperity. And there was one material in which they said that the unions were protesting in France, but all the youth movements in 1968 were completely ignored by the people in the Sahia Film Studio. I mean, ignored because they probably weren't allowed to do any material on that. But yes, there are a lot of contradictions. I think inside the discourse that you can actually see in the footage, there are contradictions in its own discourse in the same time frame. In this 1 year, you see people going back and forth on what they say and how they represent events. And I can't remember the question, sorry.
I really loved how playfully you used as a structural device some of these contradictions, you know, in a sense, right? There was that trip that Marginanu took with some other students abroad, and then he was arguing to capitalism, right? Oh, everything is colorful there, and all these billboards are attacking you to buy things. Meanwhile, in Romania, they were doing the same things, you know, the month of gifting and so on and so forth. So it became a structural kind of device, a repetition that added something new every time. It was super playful. I love that. I wanted to ask you, there are many moments in the audio and some direct footage that are so striking. Like, okay, for me, the first critique I heard in the film was when the children, at about minute 7, they're saying, oh yeah, before the Children's Day, they come and give us swings, and then 2 days after they pick it up again. Like, where did you find that? Like,
I don't know. I stumbled upon it. I was as shocked as you are to find it. It doesn't resemble anything I've seen. I mean, they just blurred this out. They come and take our swings away. I think it was kind of a bit of critique of the system that they would allow to preserve an image of normality, and that critique is possible, you know. I think it's a bit of that, because you don't see that anywhere. And it's also children. You can always say, they don't know what they're speaking of, you know.
There were a few other moments though. There was a time when the peasants that were supposed to work in this collective, right, to take care of the land, they actually offered critique. They're like, oh yeah, we come at 10 a.m. late, to work, because this actual, basically they were implying this way of doing things is not efficient, is not as it's supposed to be. So those were really gems in a way that is great that you found those. Perhaps you have time for one more question. Yeah. Okay. Well, of course, I'm really interested. If you encountered, we're making a film, it's usually a struggle, right? Whether it's about the politics of funding or editing choices or even collaborative, relationships within the team and with other people involved. What were some of the most notable maybe struggles that you encountered in making this film, and if there were ways in which you resolve them, if that can be mentioned, what I mean, because there's always something happening in filmmaking that, yeah.
Well, the struggle for me was if I should put in those texts or not. That was my own personal struggle. I preferred the film without them. I thought that is how I wanted it to be seen. I thought it was edited without them at the beginning. And it had an emotional arc also, which you could feel it. It starts very cheerful and then it just goes down. And there's a moment where you just, and this is I heard from friends who saw it, there's one specific moment in the film when they would feel that it turned ugly. And this is how me and Letizia tried to edit it. The struggle was to accept that it needed some pause, because it was so fast. People couldn't follow through, which wasn't necessarily a problem, but the problem of interpretation and of not having a single thread to grab onto, to help you go through the film. So that was a struggle for me to decide that, although I personally prefer it differently, it's better if I actually want this film to be seen by other people than myself. It needs some breathing space, and I need to do this. And I thought it would be maybe more difficult. Of course, the whole editing process was absolutely exhausting. I mean, me and Letizia worked months like a factory job, starting in the morning until like an 8-hour session each day. So it was pretty exhausted, and I was pretty demanding also with her. So, but I think what was surprisingly not a struggle for me was just I'm just gonna try something out. I didn't have any hesitations regarding the structures, or I thought, no, this is what I want to do, and I'm just going to do it like this, and this is the only way I know how to do it. This is what I told myself, to justify the experiment. And of course, the fact that I would have wanted the film to be seen by more people and to be discussed by larger audiences, which didn't really happen. And I felt like I failed. True, to be very honest, I felt like I completely failed after I finished the film. But I think this is this is probably part of the process, and this is a struggle that every director goes through. Probably if you have like a great success and you win the Oscar or something, you would be satisfied. But I think the rest of them, even the people who are constantly in film festivals and they win awards, it's always a struggle to finance another project, to get people to back you up, to show it to larger audiences. And yeah, I just need to accept that it's part of the industry. Yeah.
Yeah, and of course in Romania this industry looks a little bit different maybe than in some places. It's it's as dominated by men, of course, as everywhere else. But there's also a different kind of more elitist structure that I think it dictates who gets to make films, how to make them, who gets to see them, and so on and so forth. This is the critique I have to offer to our.
It started to diversify a bit, I think, lately. So yeah, we'll see.
Thank you so much. I have many more questions, but I'll just leave you with my favorite part of the film that I loved it so much, which was, I think it was after this Congress of writers and whatnot, basically the intellectual elites that usually should be in charge of revolutionizing our thought and pushing us forward and maybe critiquing regimes that are, predatory and so on and so forth. They were having a cornucopia or whatever the word is of food and wine and with the tyrant, and then you had this song that was a love song. I don't know it, I've never heard it before, but it went something like oh my darling, I believe in you, I really do, in your eyes the skies are. That was just so brilliant and I loved it. I watched it several times. Perhaps sometimes you'll tell us how you made that choice.
Yes, I can tell you very shortly. That was one of my favorite fragments of the whole archive. I was absolutely shocked by how they were groveling in front of him, pushing to, have a chin-chin with the champagne. And I thought, this is insane. Why? And I chose that, of course, the song specifically to represent how I saw them, what they were doing. They truly believe. Of course, they didn't do. Maybe some of them did, but it's just hard to watch. It's very hard to watch. And if you see it without the sound, it's even worse. You can see the madness in their eyes. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I think it's time for us to invite questions from the public. If we have some, please. They will be direct through audio, right? I understand, not in the chat box. Okay, yeah.
Thank you very much, Raluca, for your answers, and thank you, Mariangela, for very, very thoughtful, interesting questions. I would actually, coming to this Q&A, I had my question after I watched your movie Raluca twice, and for me it was like you intended to answer Ujica's autobiography of Ceausescu, because you didn't give Ceausescu a voice, because you didn't make him your character, your protagonist, and you refrained from making him a star. So I love that. But my question to you is, did you do that in answer to Ujica's film? Did you mean that kind of subtle dialogue, although so many years after Ujica's film? But congratulations for this movie. It's amazing.
Thank you so much. Well, of course, I cannot presume to dialogue with Mr. Ujica, so it wasn't my intention to dialogue with the film, but of course I know the film, I've seen the film. What I can tell you for certain is that, yes, the choice not to have Ceausescu as much, it is because he was exhaustively dealt with in Mr. Ujica's film in a very creative way. And also, what I can tell you for certain is that I withheld from watching the film while I was editing. So I seen it like 5 years earlier, and then I said I will only watch when I finish editing, because I didn't want to be influenced by it. I wanted to have like a very clear mind and not. Of course, if you like something, you can adopt it even instinctually, and you do it. And then when I saw the film, I said, "Oh, I did it differently. Thank God, this is what I wanted to do." So I was pleased with myself. But that was the strategy, not to actually watch it, but just watch it after, and then compare it after I've made my film, not before. Yeah.
And I have to say, you did a wonderful job. And because you mentioned the cards that preface each of the 6 parts, yes, they function very well, and they offer
for me at least, and I told you before our Q&A that I watched a movie once with my class, and for them it was illuminating that cards and the contextualizing, ideologically speaking or so, gave them something to hold on and to see the movie, to understand the movie through a lens. But I also think what you did for me personally, I was 5 in 68 at the time, and I kind of remember some parts, but you said today that actually you wanted to deconstruct Romanians and Europeans' idea of communism as one monolithical concept. And you did even more than that, because for me, I knew all about all these variations of communism. I have thought about that. But for me, you did even more. You deconstructed the propaganda that was still present in 68, when many of us think, oh no, that was a beautiful time. No, it was an ugly time in 68 too. And you showed them, you showed all of us that kind of piercing the bubble of presuming that, that was the golden age of communism. It might have been, but it was still ugly.
Well, yes, I mean, the propaganda was always there. What, for me, the difference is the living standard for normal, regular people, which was higher during that decade and towards the end of the decade, then the decade before, of course, which was post-war, and then after, which started with an economic crisis and then just starvation towards the end, you know. So yes, what I find interesting, for example, is that people say that, oh no, it's in 1971 that he started thinking about censoring the culture, the literature and culture very hardly. But all of his ideas, you can see it in 68 already. You can see it in his speeches. They're present, but he doesn't have the legitimacy that the invasion of Prague and the speech in the balcony gives him. So he gets legitimacy from that event, from his action and the reaction towards the invasion, and he climbs on this legitimacy on top of the whole party and then the country and everything else. So I think it's, in a way, it's interesting to see that shift happen in real time through that material. Yeah.
I just have a quick comment to make. It's not really a question, but I was born a few years after you, so I, mostly kind of grew up in the wake of the revolution. And of course, I kind of grew up hearing about, it was mostly, I guess, how you said, how it was very kind of black and white. There wasn't really that wave to show the differences in communist years, how, it's not like one or the other. And so it was interesting for me to watch the documentary because, of course I knew there's propaganda, but I didn't envision it, or I didn't learn about it that way, that it was like so nuanced, or the fact that they made it so, she looks so bubbly, like it's, come on, like it's good for everybody, so it was interesting to see this. It's in a way, it almost made me feel like it was like a Hollywood-esque, like take on the propaganda that I hadn't experienced, when I lived in the country. So thank you for that new perspective.
Thank you too. And what I want to say is that while I was watching some of the material, if you watch TV, if you turn on Romanian TV right now and you get like a commercial break, you see the same things in the commercial breaks, the same type of commercials. Oh, I think it's so nice. You look at how the commercials are filmed, who is represented. It's always middle class. It's always so. You kind of get the same kind of techniques to sell a product. They were trying to sell an idea, of course, but here to sell a product, you still see them present. Yeah. But this is just like a side comment. Thank you.
I have a question too, and my question, I'm going to preface my question with noticing how eager we are to confess our ages so we can talk about how we relate to the movie. So I wasn't born in 68. I was born in 76, and like you, I grew up hearing all these stories about how the 60s, when my brother was a kid, were much easier, and my mom would tell me how much easier she would find food to feed her child, and that wasn't the same when I grew up. So, but all of this is to say that, and because Ilana mentioned Ujika's movie, right? All of this is to say that even with the cartons about ideology, how are people who have never experienced communism, how do they relate to the movie? Or how were you thinking about this, right? Because, people expect a documentary to give them some knowledge, some context, right? And this was also the criticism for Wojcika's movie. So some people have hated the movie for this reason, and some people have loved the movie for this exact reason, right? So how is this interplay between Mariangela said history, but here it's also about remembering and what we're remembering and what we know and so on and so forth. So how did you solve this in your mind when you proposed this with no historical context, basically?
It wasn't really solved in my mind because I realized I cannot explain an experience to someone who has not experienced it just a bit, or who hasn't experienced it through their parents or grandparents, through the stories. So for audiences who have no idea, don't have like a direct or a link with that period, or they don't live in Romania, for example. I think it's a bit different for Western audiences who have also lived in a narrative about the Cold War, Soviet Union, communism. It was framed in a specific way. So because I don't know, I mean, I know, but I don't really know exactly how they feel about it. I cannot speak to those audiences. The film mostly speaks to people in the former Soviet bloc and of course Romanian people. I didn't actually think about foreign audiences when I made the film. I only thought about Romanians and how we look at this and what can we get from this, what conclusions can we draw. And it was never, I mean, I never felt like I managed to find a solution to explain the context to others, because that would have meant that I would focus on explaining context and not actually playing with doing what I want to do with the material. And I think there was one idea that I had in mind, was that if I can find this in a history book, if I can read it about in a history book, if a history book can explain it to me, then I don't need to put this in the film. Because if you want context, you can read the book. It can give you so much more information than I can give you in an hour and a half. And after that, you can look at this because this adds to that information. Yeah, that was my, I had like a mantra, if it's not in the images, it didn't happen. That was my mantra. So just focus on what you see, yeah.
Can I add another question about, because you were talking about archival footage and the fact that it brings with it things that have to do with preserving these images, and so I guess what I'm asking is, can you tell us a little bit more about your work with the archive and what the archive means in this cultural historical context right now in Romania, where the archive, I mean, I'm talking specifically about Alexandru Sahia archive.
Well, I first heard of the archive, about this archive, when Adina Brădan started her Sahia Vintage project, and she would show during the One World Romanian Film Festival, she would show films from the archive. Then friends, colleagues started to be very passionate, and they started to go into the archive and dig more. And I don't know, I started to have like a great deal of respect for all these people who worked at the Sahia Film Studio, because they kind of had to do a difficult job. If you watch the films, you can see that some truly invest artistic ideas and feelings into their films when they feel they're allowed, that the subject allows them a little bit to be more careful stylistically, to, I don't know, film a beautiful landscape and put it there, to be more reflective in their films. Others, when the subject does not allow them, they just go straight forward and they cut, like every 5 seconds they cut a new frame. While I was working with the material, I developed a great deal of respect for the people working there, because I felt like they had a tough job. Also, on the other hand, I knew that they were privileged citizens in comparison to others, because they could travel abroad if they had like to shoot a specific film. They had the opportunity, because they were very skilled, you know, I mean, yeah, of course, your boss can come and dictate and tell you what he wants, but you're still the one doing it. You still have a little bit of power left in there. So my relationship with the archive, I started with this very a lot of respect for the material and a lot of respect for and I tried to get rid of it along the way, not so I could make the film, you know, could actually play with what they did. But ultimately what I wanted to do was to show that I truly respect the work they did. It did teach me something. I think it's worthy material. It's the only visual material, documentary visual material that you have from that period. These are the only images that we have. I mean, we need to look at them with much more attention, you know, and actually treasure them and try to preserve them, because maybe in 50 years people will completely forget. Of course, if the planet survives, in 50 years maybe other generations will want to look back and see images from a distant past, and these are the only ones, you know. And I think we should also try and research this archive as much as possible, while we still have like a direct connection with those events, you know, through our parents, grandparents, and even us who managed to live at least a bit of an adult life in that period. So yeah, this is my relationship with the archive. It's I like it. Yeah.
Thank you. These were my questions. I think we can wrap it up unless there are other questions, or unless you want to say something that we haven't kind of brought up, or you know, in your answer.
I think you touched on everything that I actually had to do, all of the ideas that I struggled with during the film. And yeah, there's really one thing I would like to say. It's that you also, Ilana, you mentioned that you showed the film twice, and I also showed this film to my friends twice, or I think they only saw it twice. Some of them saw it twice. And what I've always found interesting is I would just change, like, I don't know, I would take out a bit, like 2 minutes here, and I would put 3 minutes here. And they would say, oh, you've changed so much of it. And I said, no, it's the same film. I just took out the 2 minutes from the timeline. And I always found it fascinating how they would watch the films and how they would actually watch the film the second time, because at first you're just there's so much information coming from everywhere, but the second time you have already seen it and you can actually see what I did. So the second watching is always best, and you always have the impression you see some other film, which is great, you know. It's yeah, it's a bonus. So this is all I wanted to say. I just really wanted to thank you for the opportunity to talk about the film. I haven't talked about it for a long time. I even forgot I made it. So it's always nice to be reminded of the struggles, and it's kind of like a push forward for the next project. So thank you so much for this discussion. Yeah.
Thank you as well for being with us today, and thank you, Mariangela, for moderating the conversation. I think that this is what we need to take away. We need to watch The Certainty of Probabilities twice, not just once. And so I invite you all to do just that during the Romanian Film Festival online, and please be with us for the rest of the Q&As and through November 27 for the movies and for our exciting encounters with the filmmakers. Thank you again, Raluca. Thank you again, Mariangela.
Thank you.
Thank you to our public who's with us.
Sure. Bye.
Bye. Thank you so much again. Bye.